I sat upright in the consultation chair, pen still in hand, as my son's whisper echoed louder than any diagnosis. Not worth the expense. 4 words, barely spoken, not meant for me to hear, but I did. After 31 years of scraped knees, tuition checks, birthday cakes, and silence where thank yous should have been, suddenly I was a calculation, a liability, a cost to be cut. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The fluorescent lights buzzed low overhead, casting a sterile white glow over the small consultation room. Janet sat upright in the vinyl-padded chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her face was carefully composed, the only hint of tension showing in the whiteness of her knuckles. Across from her, Dr. Levinson flipped through a stack of papers, each one bearing the price tag of pain, pre-op fees, anesthesia estimates, recovery supplies, and the glaring subtotal for the hip replacement itself. Claire sat in the corner, quietly tapping notes into her phone, her presence more observational than participatory. Melanie perched on the armrest of Derek's chair, her perfectly French manicured fingers idly brushing lint from his sleeve. As I said, Dr. Levinson continued, your insurance will cover about 60%. But with your deductible and out-of-network anesthesia, you're looking at roughly $23,000 out of pocket. Janet didn't flinch. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim leather notebook, flipped it open to a page marked, for later, medical. Her pen moved deliberately. I'll dip into my retirement to cover what insurance won't, she said, her voice even. That was when she heard it. A whisper, low and sharp, just beneath the breath. Not worth the expense. It came from Derek, her son. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. He didn't say it to her, didn't look at her. His eyes stayed glued to the floor, and Melanie didn't so much as blink. If she'd heard it, she gave no sign, but Claire did. From the corner, her head lifted slowly, her eyes, sharp and dark, locked on Derek with a stillness that didn't belong in a room full of soft plastic chairs and procedural paperwork. Janet kept writing, one loop of the pen, then another, then she capped it. The room was silent for one long second, heavy with what had just been said and what had not been acknowledged. Dr. Levinson broke it, flipping the page. We can schedule the pre-op imaging as early as next week, if that works for you. Janet gave a small nod. It does. Melanie leaned forward. Will she be able to walk right away, or will she need, one of those scooters? Janet smiled politely. It didn't touch her eyes. I'll be walking, she said. Faster than expected. Claire stood. I'll get the car. No rush, Janet said, her voice like glass. She looked at her son, who hadn't looked up once since the whisper. I'd like a few more minutes with the doctor. Derek rose anyway. We'll wait outside, he muttered, brushing past Claire without meeting her eyes. The door clicked shut behind them. Only then did Janet let out a breath, one she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Dr. Levinson glanced at her with a flicker of concern. You all right? I'm fine, she said, though her jaw was tight. Thank you for your time. Claire lingered outside the door, phone in hand, her gaze fixed on Derek and Melanie standing stiffly by the elevator. She didn't move to greet them, just watched. Back inside, Janet stared at the door for a moment longer, then turned to the doctor. One last question, she said. If I wait 6 months to schedule, just hypothetically, does the price go up? Dr. Levinson frowned. There's no indication of that. But waiting could worsen the damage. She nodded slowly, already knowing she wouldn't wait, but it wasn't about the hip anymore. It was about the whisper, the one he didn't think she heard. She had. And so had Claire. The light through the kitchen window had shifted by the time Janet got home, falling across the counter in thin, golden lines that made the marble look softer than it was. She didn't notice. Her keys landed in the ceramic bowl with a sharp clink, echoing through the quiet. She walked straight to the dining table. The manila folder was already waiting for her. She had pulled it from the hall closet the night before, when her hip wouldn't let her sleep, and the silence in the house pressed in like humidity before a storm. She laid the papers out one by one, each with her signature. Each a document that had seemed prudent at the time. Her will, the power of attorney, the cabin title, the Advanced Healthcare Directive. All of them bore Derek's name, not Melanie's, not a friend, not Claire, just Derek Lee Collins. She lowered herself slowly into the chair. Her hip throbbed, a warning she ignored. There was something cold about seeing it all laid out like that. Her life in documents. Years of assumptions codified in legal ink. She stared at the thick black print of her son's name on the top line of the will. Beneficiary, Derek Lee Collins. There had never been a conversation about it. She had just done what mothers do. The way she'd packed his lunch through high school. The way she'd sent him money in college without him ever asking. The way she'd kept his baby blanket folded in her cedar chest, even after he moved out. The memory hit her then, years ago when he didn't come home for Thanksgiving. He hadn't even called. She made excuses for him to the neighbors. That had been the start of her quiet understanding. She was there for him, but he was not really there for her. She reached for the pen on the counter, not to write, just to hold, to feel it in her hand, to remind herself that her signature had power. A knock came at the front door, two quick, one slow. Janet didn't even rise. "Come in, Iris," she called. The door opened and in stepped her neighbor and oldest friend, carrying a Tupperware container and wearing her usual no-nonsense jeans and a zip-up fleece. "I brought that chicken and wild rice soup from Jean's cafe. Figured you wouldn't be in the mood to cook." Janet offered the barest smile. "Thank you." "You figured right." Iris's eyes dropped to the table. Her expression didn't shift much, but her voice lost its usual lightness. "These what I think they are," Janet nodded. "The will, the cabin, bank authorization, power of attorney, all signed back when I thought it made sense." Iris pulled out a chair and sat. "What changed?" Janet didn't answer right away. She folded the healthcare directive in half, gently aligning the edges. Then she said, "He told me I wasn't worth the expense." Iris blinked. "What?" "At the doctor's office. He said it under his breath. Didn't think I'd hear, but I did." Iris's mouth tightened. "And Melanie?" Didn't flinch. She's always been good at silence. They sat in that stillness for a beat. Then Janet reached for another paper, this one newer. A single business card was clipped to the top. "Richard Blake, Estate Planning and Elder Law." "I called him this morning," Janet said. "He's an attorney, comes highly recommended. We meet Wednesday." Iris tilted her head. "You're doing this." "I am." "You're sure?" Janet looked up, her eyes dry but steel. "I've been sure since I heard his voice in that office. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he said them. Like he'd already done the math. Like I was a line item on his balance sheet." She stood slowly, walked to the kitchen, and poured 2 glasses of sweet tea. No sugar added. She handed one to Iris. "I thought love would count for something," Janet said, sitting again. "But maybe the only thing that counts in the end is what you put in writing." Iris took a sip. "You need me to go with you?" "No, but I need your help making a list. Every place his name appears. Every joint account. Every paper I signed without thinking twice." Iris set her glass down with a nod. "We'll start with the bank, then the cabin, then your medical." Janet looked down at the will again, her own handwriting in the margins, little notes from years ago reminding her to update something, add something else, but she never had. Until now. She opened a clean legal pad and began writing. To do: revoke POA, remove from will, retitle cabin, reassign healthcare proxy, passwords, change all. She paused. Then underline that last item. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Iris said quietly. Janet nodded. "It does." The next morning, a single unread message sat at the top of Janet's phone. "Melanie. Hey, hope you're feeling okay today. Let us know if you need help with groceries or anything." No punctuation at the end. Casual, detached. Probably typed from the passenger seat while Derek drove to work, or maybe while waiting in line for overpriced coffee. Janet didn't open it. She stared at the screen long enough for the preview to fade. Then she locked the phone and slid it face down on the counter. There was nothing in the message that asked for forgiveness. Nothing that acknowledged the words she wasn't supposed to hear. And so, for the first time in a very long time, Janet responded with the only language they both understood perfectly: silence. Instead, she opened her laptop. It took a moment to load, the fan whining softly as it blinked awake. She opened her email, found Richard Blake's reply from yesterday, and hit compose. Subject: full removal. Richard, I've reviewed my estate documents and am ready to initiate full removal of Derek Lee Collins from all previously held roles and designations. Let's start with the will, POA, and real estate. I'll bring supporting documents to our meeting Wednesday. Janet A. Collins. She read it twice, not a wasted word, no apology, no explanation. She hit send. The cursor blinked at her like it was waiting for her next move. Janet opened her old finance binder, the navy blue one she'd kept in a cabinet behind cleaning supplies for years. She'd almost forgotten it was there. She pulled out a tattered envelope labeled Private, Do Not File. Inside were several printed statements from accounts she hadn't looked at in ages. A savings account from her first teaching job. A small investment account her father had helped her open in 1989. A cash management account from the art co-op she'd briefly run in the late 90s. Derek didn't know about any of them. He hadn't asked, and she had never offered. Not out of secrecy, just because he'd never seemed interested in anything but what was convenient. Now, that lack of interest served her well. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. At the top she wrote, Assets Derek is unaware of, then listed each one. Methodically, her pen steady. When the list was done, she opened a new tab on her browser and set up an account with a secure digital vault service. She spent the next hour transferring every password, banking, utilities, subscriptions, insurance, into the encrypted manager, changing them as she went. No more scribbled notes in her nightstand. No more shared access. She paused only once. Hovering over the entry labeled Joint Checking, Wells Fargo, she didn't delete it, not yet, but she did tag it, Review, Priority. Then she opened a blank document. The title came to her immediately, Disentanglement, Phase 1. She typed the word Objective, then sat with her hands on the keyboard. The blinking cursor seemed to ask her not what she wanted, but what she deserved. Finally, she began typing. To legally, financially, and emotionally sever all unreciprocated ties. To protect what I have left. To leave nothing vulnerable to those who mistake silence for permission. She saved it. Closed the laptop. Exhaled. The landline rang. She almost didn't answer. No one but spam callers used the house phone anymore. But something in her chest nudged her to pick it up. Hello? A pause. Then a soft, familiar voice. Grandma. Janet sat straighter. Claire? I heard what he said. Her voice caught, as if she wasn't sure if she should be saying it out loud. At the doctor's office, I was behind him. You didn't deserve that. Janet's mouth parted, but no sound came. For once, she didn't have a response ready. I'm not going to pretend I didn't hear it, Claire added, her voice firmer now. And I'm not going to pretend he's who you deserve. Janet pressed the receiver tighter to her ear. You're not like them, she whispered. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then, do you want help? Janet closed her eyes. Yes, she said. I think I do. Claire exhaled. Then let's begin. Janet sat in the leather chair across from Richard Blake's desk, her hands folded neatly over the legal folder in her lap. The office was nothing flashy. Mahogany desk, soft lighting, a tall bookshelf lined with binders and framed degrees. But it was quiet, respectful, the kind of place where decisions mattered. Richard, mid-60s and crisply dressed in a gray sport coat, adjusted his glasses and scanned the page in front of him with careful, deliberate eyes. You brought everything, he said, not looking up. Most clients wait until the second or third meeting to even find the deed. I don't like waiting, Janet said. He offered a half smile and nodded. Good, because this, he lifted the folder, is a case of long overdue change. She sat straighter. I want it all redone, not updated, not revised. Redone. He flipped to the next page. Walk me through what led to this. Janet's jaw tightened. The pattern started slowly, little things. Canceled visits, delayed callbacks, passive decisions made on my behalf. Then money, quiet pressure to simplify our assets. Derek positioned himself as the responsible one, but it was never about care. It was about control. Richard leaned forward slightly. Financial control. Yes, his name is on everything that matters. Some of it I gave willingly, some of it I gave reflexively. but I'm done mistaking obligation for love. Richard sat back, thoughtful. Then we start by pulling the foundation out from under him. He picked up his pen. We'll revoke the existing will and create a new one. Derek's out, completely. No residuals, no trusts, no symbolic mentions. Janet nodded once. Clean break. Power of attorney, nullified. We'll file revocation paperwork with the state. Medical proxy, also revoked. We'll designate a neutral third-party professional. You don't want to tie Claire to decisions that could be manipulated later. Janet hesitated. I want her named executor, but only symbolically. Sentiment, not exposure. Richard scribbled a note. Understood. I'll give her a legacy appointment, ceremonial. The trust will hold authority, not the person. Janet reached into her bag and pulled out a small white envelope. I'd also like to establish a living trust. Everything moving forward, home, savings, pension, even the art co-op shares, goes through that. Richard opened the envelope and skimmed the list. You've already inventoried the assets. Down to the last certificate, she said. I want everything in my name, nothing shared, nothing assumed. There was a long silence, not heavy, just focused. She watched as Richard's pen moved with clean, practiced confidence. It felt like the opposite of everything Derek had become. Slippery, half-thought, transactional. You've done a lot of work to prepare for this, Richard said. I lived a long time under the illusion that doing right by someone would be enough. She looked at him squarely. It wasn't. And now I'm the one cleaning up that myth. He looked up. There was no sympathy in his eyes, just clarity. You're doing the right thing. I know, she said quietly. That's why I came here instead of yelling in a parking lot or crying in a waiting room. This is the consultation I paid for, not the one he felt entitled to. Richard leaned back in his chair. This will take a few days to formalize, but we can begin the process now. I'll draft everything and send a package for your review by Friday. She reached into her bag one last time, pulling out her checkbook. And your retainer? Don't worry, we bill by results, not time. She smiled for the first time that morning. Good, I'm here for results. As she stood to leave, he extended a hand across the desk. She shook it, firm grip, no hesitation. There was something sacred about being in a room where her words translated directly into consequence. Back in the parking lot, the wind had picked up. Leaves skittered across the pavement. Janet paused by the driver's door, pulled out her phone, and opened her password vault. One final entry sat blinking, untagged. Joint checking, Wells Fargo. She tapped it, selected Remove from Vault, and hit Delete. The voicemail came at 10:14 p.m. Janet was already in bed, reading the same paragraph of her paperback for the third time when the phone buzzed on the nightstand. She didn't recognize the number. It was Derek's, but it came through as unknown now, probably calling from the office or Melanie's phone. She let it ring out. A minute later, one new voicemail. She let it sit there. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Only when the house had gone still and the ceiling fan began its slow, rhythmic sweep did she finally tap play. Derek's voice filled the room, thinner than usual. Hey, I talked to Mel. She said maybe you misunderstood what I said at the consultation. I didn't mean it like that. You've got to know that. Look, can we just talk? Don't make any decisions right now, okay? Just call me back, please. There was a pause before the message cut off. No, love you? Not even a goodbye, just a vague plea, full of hedging and softened edges. The kind of call you make when you realize something is slipping that you never thought could. Janet stared at the phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. Then she tapped delete. No save, no replay, no, maybe later, gone. She opened her contacts list and scrolled until she found his name. Derek Lee Collins. She pressed edit, scrolled down and hit block this caller. Confirmed. Her breathing slowed. There was no dramatic rush of relief, just stillness. A clean, sharp silence that wrapped around her like fresh linens. She closed the book and turned off the lamp. The next morning, she dressed in soft navy slacks and a button-down blouse that still held a faint whiff of lavender from last week's wash. It was the kind of outfit that made her feel like herself. Smart, composed, never apologizing for being prepared. At the hospital's admissions office, the line moved slowly. Clipboards shuffled, Pens clicked. Phones rang in the background. When it was her turn, she approached the counter and gave her name. The woman behind the desk, a young professional in fitted scrubs with a name badge that read Jenna, Patient Liaison, smiled politely and asked her to take a seat. 10 minutes later, they called her back. Inside the small administrative office, Janet explained everything clearly. She wanted to update her records, change her emergency contact, and confirm how billing would be handled for her upcoming procedure. Jenna typed quickly, her demeanor warm but efficient. All right, we have Derek listed as primary contact, and also on file for billing communication. Would you like to remove him? Yes, permanently. Replace him with 2 names, Iris Monroe and Claire Collins. Both are local. I'll provide their numbers. Jenna raised an eyebrow, barely, but didn't comment. Understood. We'll also update your care directive authorization. Janet leaned forward slightly. And I'll be handling the financials myself. Out of pocket. I've made arrangements. Jenna glanced at her screen. Actually, Ms. Collins, you're covered. Janet blinked. Excuse me? Jenna smiled. You've been on our legacy educator plan for over 20 years. Your union classified you under a full supplemental category. You were never supposed to be charged anything more than a $500 surgical deductible. Someone just needed to flag it, and someone needed to ask the right way. Janet sat back slowly, absorbing it. The quiet wave of it, she gave a dry, astonished laugh. And someone needed not to whisper the wrong thing. Jenna tilted her head. Sorry? Janet shook her head. Nothing, just thank you. Jenna stood, extending her hand. We'll send a new care summary to your portal by the end of the day, and I've removed Derek from every point of contact. Good, Janet said, rising with her. Let's keep it that way. She walked out of the hospital into a midday breeze. Her steps were slow, measured, but steady. A group of younger women in scrubs passed her, chatting and laughing. And for the first time in weeks, Janet didn't feel invisible. She felt untouched, like a boundary had finally held. At her car, she checked her phone. Not for Derek, not for Melanie. There was a new message from Claire, just a single photo. It showed a stack of junk mail on Janet's porch, with one envelope sliced open. Inside, clearly visible, was a bank withdrawal slip. The name at the top, Derek Lee Collins. Caption underneath, found this in the mail pile. You didn't open it, but I did. Janet stared at the photo for a long moment. Then she got in the car. Her hand hovered over the ignition, and a single thought surfaced. He wasn't just whispering. He was preparing. The co-op sat at the edge of town, tucked between a modest grove of pines and a retired elementary school turned community garden. It was built low, just 2 stories, with soft beige siding and wide, accessible walkways that curved gently like someone had thought about how feet, walkers, and wheels would move through space. Janet stood at the entryway of Unit 1B, hands in her jacket pockets, eyes scanning every corner as the leasing agent, a soft-voiced woman named Trina, unlocked the door. All ground floor, Trina said as she stepped inside. No stairs anywhere. Every unit has grab bars pre-installed, smart thermostats, and radiant floor heating. This one faces west, so you'll get the soft light in the afternoon. Janet stepped over the threshold. The place smelled faintly of lemon oil and fresh paint. The living room was compact but warm, with a bay window that looked out onto a patch of trimmed lawn and a single dogwood tree. The kitchen was open concept, with wide counters and low drawers. No wasted space, no drama. Iris stood near the patio door, arms crossed, watching Janet more than the room. You thinking of leaving the old place? Iris asked after Trina gave them a moment alone. Janet didn't answer right away. She was still walking, slowly, her fingers brushing the smooth countertops, the recessed handles of the closet doors. It didn't feel like a downgrade. It felt like intention. If you're starting over, Iris said gently, start somewhere that fits now, not where you thought you'd be 10 years ago. Janet turned to her. It's quiet here. That's what you need. I thought what I needed was to make the old place mine again. It's not yours anymore, Iris said. Not the way it was. You know it. Janet exhaled, then nodded once. Trina returned with a folder. If you'd like to reserve, it's a $250 deposit. Refundable if anything changes before the move-in. Janet reached into her purse. Let's do it. Trina smiled, slid the form across the countertop. You'll have up to 3 months after your recovery to finalize the transition. That work for you? More than, Janet said, and signed. That afternoon, back at her house, the light in the foyer felt different, like it was already starting to detach itself. Janet walked through the rooms without turning on the lights, just observing. The way you do when you're preparing to leave, not to mourn, just to understand. She opened the hallway closet and pulled out a stack of linens she hadn't used in years. Floral sheets from a guest room no one stayed in anymore. A mixer she hadn't plugged in since her last Christmas with her sister. She started a pile. Donation. In the den, she stared at a framed photo of Derek in his cap and gown. College graduation, the pride on her face unmistakable. She turned it over and slid it into the bottom of a donation box. Not out of spite. Just closure. She began taking mental inventory for the appraiser. Flooring wear, age of the water heater, new roof estimate. The practical layer, the transition layer. Around 5, the doorbell rang. Claire stood there holding a quart of homemade soup in one hand and a roll of packing tape in the other. Felt like soup, she said. And I figured you'd need this. Janet stepped aside. Come in. They worked quietly for a while. Claire wrapped glassware while Janet sorted keepsakes from clutter. The kitchen filled with the sound of cardboard flaps and the faint hum of NPR from the old transistor radio on the windowsill. You know, Claire said, finally breaking the silence. It's kinda nice. This version of your house, the undone one, like it's breathing again. Janet looked around. Boxes stacked near the entry, closets half emptied. A quiet hum of purpose under everything. It feels lighter, Janet said. Less haunted. Claire leaned against the counter. So, you're really moving. I'm not calling it that yet, Janet said. I'm calling it considering. Claire smirked. You've already made the decision. Janet stirred her tea. Maybe, but it's the first one I've made without explaining it to anyone. Claire's phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced down. Her face changed. Janet caught it. What? Claire turned the phone toward her. A photo. Grainy, zoomed in, but unmistakable. It showed Derek in the parking lot of a local credit union, holding papers, standing next to Melanie. Claire's voice was low. That's not the bank you use. Janet stared at it. The warmth drained slowly from her fingers. No, she said, it's not. The email hit her inbox at 9:02 a.m. Subject line. Family conversation. Sender, Melanie R. Collins. She hadn't used her Gmail in months. Janet stared at the thread. Claire, Iris, Derek, and 2 addresses she didn't recognize CC'd in. No greeting, no warmth. Just, Derek and I would like to talk through everything before things go too far. We know you're going through a lot right now. Please give us a chance to clear the air and clarify. We don't want this to become something it doesn't have to be. It was the kind of email designed to seem civil, but it came dressed in patronization. No mention of the withdrawal slip, no explanation for the credit union, and not a single direct apology. Janet closed the message without typing a word. Instead, she opened a new tab. New message. One recipient only. To Claire Collins. Subject. Nothing, trust me. I know what I'm doing. She hit send. No signature, no attachments, just the truth. By noon, Janet was back in Richard Blake's office. The desk now held 3 thick folders, each one tabbed and labeled. Will trust, directives. This one first, Richard said, sliding the will toward her. Janet opened it without hesitation. Each page had her name at the top. Janet A. Collins. No co-signatories. No second party named. The sections flowed cleanly. Residency clause, specific bequests, residual distribution. Clause 14, Richard pointed, includes your language. No contests. No amendments after execution. You've built a firewall. Janet read it. This document is final and absolute. Any challenges will result in full disinheritance of the contesting party, with no exceptions, no reconsideration, and no right to mediation or clarification. She signed. 1 pen stroke, steady, ink as sure as her voice had become. Next came the living trust. Every asset they had discussed, House, pension, investment accounts, even the small antique collection from the attic was declared under the Janet A. Collins Living Trust, with her as sole trustee until death. No successor listed? Richard asked. Not until I'm sure the successor deserves it, she said. Claire will get something, but I don't want her burdened with the title. Understood. He passed her the directives packet: health, finances, end-of-life care, all controlled by independent fiduciary and care professionals. I want no family interference, Janet said flatly. None. Richard lifted a brow. You've officially outpapered the entire family, she smiled. It was overdue. The signing ceremony didn't feel like paperwork. It felt like reclaiming a story everyone else thought they were entitled to finish. Back in her car, Janet didn't drive. She sat in the driver's seat, folder in her lap, engine off. Outside, the clouds hung low, gray and slow-moving like thoughts that hadn't landed yet. Her phone buzzed. Another email, this one from Derek. Subject: Mom, please don't do this. She didn't open it. Instead, she moved the entire thread, Melanie's group email, Derek's follow-ups, into a folder she created right then and there. She named it Mistakes I Never Made, then archived it. Later that evening, Claire returned with empty boxes and a new roll of bubble wrap. They packed quietly for a while until Claire looked over from the dining room table. I saw they emailed. They did. Are you going to respond? I already did, Janet said. Claire nodded once. What now? Janet picked up a teacup and wrapped it carefully. Now, we finish what we started. Claire smiled faintly. You sure you don't want to tell them everything? Janet taped a box shut. Telling them would mean giving them a place in the narrative. I'm not writing them in anymore. Claire stood, stretched, and pulled her jacket on. As she reached for her keys, her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it and froze. What? Janet asked, instantly alert. Claire turned the screen toward her. It was a screenshot, forwarded from a friend Claire knew who worked at the credit union. The name on the form was Derek's. So was the request. Name change request and new joint account application. Co-applicant line, Janet A. Collins. Stamped, approved. Dated, last Friday. Janet didn't speak. Claire's voice was a whisper. He forged it. Janet's hand curled slowly into a fist. Then he's not just planning, she said, calm and cold. He's stealing. It was still early enough for fog when Janet walked into the branch. The downtown location was tucked between a dry cleaner and a bike shop, small enough that the same 3 tellers rotated through the morning shifts. She knew the layout by heart, the low counters, the artificial ficus near the entrance, the faint scent of air freshener always trying to cover copier toner. But today, she didn't go to the teller window. She walked straight to the reception desk and asked for the branch manager. 10 minutes later, she was sitting in a private cubicle across from a trim woman in her 40s, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a Navy name badge. Alexis, Senior Banking Specialist. I need to revoke all joint account access immediately, Janet said. Her voice was calm but hard-edged, like gravel under slow tires. Alexis blinked. Okay. Do you have documentation showing authorization for removal? Janet pulled out a folder, neatly labeled and paper-clipped. Inside was a notarized letter, proof of identity, and on top, a copy of the forged credit union form, with her name typed cleanly into the co-applicant line. Alexis studied it for a long beat. That's not your signature, she said quietly. No, Janet replied. It isn't. Alexis exhaled slowly. We'll need to escalate this to internal security, but for your protection, I'll place an immediate freeze on any shared access. Then we'll set you up with a new account, solo, encrypted, triple authenticated. Once that's active, I'll transfer all funds manually. Nothing will move without your say-so. Janet didn't smile. She nodded. Good. For the next 20 minutes, Alexis moved with precision, clicking through tabs, verifying biometric locks, scanning Janet's ID into a system with more layers than she'd expected. She offered no small talk, no questions about family. By the time the printer spat out the final page, Janet felt the kind of clean exhaustion that only came with finishing something necessary. Alexis slid the paper toward her. You're 100% protected now. Everything's isolated. New account, new routing, No external access from any previous parties. Janet signed. Thank you. Would you like a physical card? No, not yet. Across town, Derek Collins stood in line at the credit union, phone in hand, trying again. His debit card had just declined twice, first at the gas station, then at the ATM. He rechecked the balance, the joint account they'd relied on for months, his fallback, his safety net, the one he'd been slowly draining from the inside. Read $0. Then, account inaccessible. He stared at the screen, jaw locked. Sir, the teller called out. Next, but Derek just stepped out of line and walked straight to his truck without saying a word. That night, Janet opened her laptop at the kitchen table and attached 2 PDFs to a new email. Subject, Firewall Update Number 3. Richard, please see attached proof of attempted unauthorized financial access using my forged signature at Capital River Credit Union. I've revoked joint permissions and secured all active accounts under a new structure. Add to firewall file, please. Janet A. Collins. She hit send. Then she opened the document labeled Firewall File, Final Draft, and updated the entry log. Joint account, closed. Unauthorized application, logged. Digital access, isolated. Legal counsel, notified. Emotional response, unnecessary. She saved it and closed the lid. Claire called an hour later. He went quiet. Janet sipped her tea. He would. No angry call, no text. No new emails. Nothing. Janet stared out the kitchen window into the dark backyard. The porch light had flickered out, but she didn't move to replace it. He knows he's lost access, she said. That's what he valued. Not me. The access. Claire hesitated. What now? Janet leaned back in her chair, quiet for a moment. Then, now, he learns what it feels like to be irrelevant to the outcome. The waiting room at Dr. Hensley's office hadn't changed in 20 years. Same outdated magazines. Same smell of hand sanitizer and lemon-scented disinfectant. Same hushed conversations over the sound of a local news channel murmuring from the corner television. Janet sat upright in the teal vinyl chair, a clipboard in her lap and pen already moving. She wasn't here for an exam. Not exactly. She was here to prove something. Not to Derek. Not to Melanie, not even to Richard, to herself. Dr. Hensley, her primary care physician since 2004, called her back 5 minutes early. He was kind, graying at the temples, with a warmth that never felt performative. Everything all right? He asked as they walked. I'd like a cognitive screening, Janet said plainly. Baseline, full function assessment. Documented, signed. He glanced at her, eyebrows raised. Any concerns? Symptoms? No. That's why I want it now, while there's no question. He nodded slowly. You're legally allowed to request one at any time, of course. May I ask? I'm revising my estate, she interrupted. I want a clean record that says I knew exactly what I was doing when I did it. He didn't press further. 40 minutes later, she sat across from him again. The light from his desk lamp pooling across a single sheet of paper. Your executive function, memory retention, pattern recognition, and judgment scores all fall in the highest percentile for your age group, he said, flipping through the results. Honestly, better than most people 10 years younger. Janet gave a short nod. Dr. Hensley signed the report with a steady hand and slid it into a crisp folder. You want a digital copy emailed as well? Yes, and a printed copy for my records. He looked at her over the rims of his glasses. You're not just being careful. You're building something. She held his gaze. I'm building something no one can erase. By noon she was back at Richard Blake's office, the folder in hand. His paralegal scanned the cognitive report and added it to the estate binder before Richard reviewed it himself. Documented competence, certified by a licensed physician, on file, he confirmed. Any challenge to your decisions would fall flat in court. This covers us from every angle. Janet laid her hand on the thick binder beside her. I don't want clarity questioned after the fact. I don't want an opening, not one. Richard flipped to the cover page and reached for the notary seal. Let's finish the formalities. Each page was notarized, the final version of her living trust. The Advance Healthcare Directive, durable power of attorney, voided and refiled, financial permissions, all housed under an independent fiduciary firm. Stamp after stamp, signature after signature. Janet's name repeated across every document like a quiet declaration. She decided. She authorized. She knew. When it was done, Richard exhaled and leaned back. "You know," he said, setting the seal aside, "most people come in here panicked, scared, rushed. You walked in with a strategy." Janet smiled. "Panic is for people who wait too long." Claire met her afterward in the parking lot, a coffee in each hand. "I figured you'd come out with a binder and a fireproof will," she said, offering one of the cups. Janet chuckled. "You're not wrong." They sat on a bench outside the building, the sun warming their legs through the slats of filtered autumn light. A slow breeze moved through the leaves above them, loose but certain, like things were shifting, but on Janet's terms now. "I hope I age with half your clarity," Claire said, half laughing but not joking. Janet took a sip, then set the cup down beside her. She turned to her granddaughter, her expression clear and composed. "Then don't tolerate what I did for so long." Claire's smile faded, just a little. Her eyes sharpened. "I won't," she said. They sat in silence for a while. No need to fill it. Just before they stood to leave, Claire glanced at her phone, then frowned. "What is it?" Janet asked. Claire showed her the screen. An alert from her financial tracker. A new inquiry had been placed on Claire's credit file, from a small loan office in another state, one she'd never applied to. Janet's eyes narrowed. "That's not random," she said. "No," Claire murmured. "And it has my full name, not just Claire, Claire Ann Collins." Janet stood slowly. The calm didn't leave her, but it shifted, sharpened. "We locked me down," she said. "But he's not done trying. He's looking for another way in." Claire locked her phone. "Then we lock me down, too." Janet picked up her binder, tucked it under her arm, and started walking toward the car. Her voice was low, but unshaken. "Let him run out of options trying." Janet reread the letter twice, even though she'd already memorized every word. "Dear Miss Collins, this letter confirms your total hip arthroplasty is scheduled for March 28th at 6:30 a.m. Please arrive 2 hours prior to allow for intake and anesthesia review. Post-operative rehabilitation begins the same day, and your discharge will be based on recovery benchmarks provided by your care team. You have elected to manage your recovery independently. Any changes must be submitted in writing within 10 days of this notice." She folded the page neatly, slid it back into its envelope, and placed it inside the side pocket of her suitcase, already half-packed. A clean nightgown. Non-slip socks, travel-sized toiletries, her favorite lip balm, the small things that made pain feel less institutional. She moved through the house with a methodical rhythm, removing pill bottles from the cabinet and labeling them with post-op instructions. She folded a blanket into a tote and placed it by the door. She cleared a space beside the recliner in the living room for her walker, which Claire had already dropped off in its original packaging. Then she opened the intake form from the hospital's digital portal and unclicked the section labeled Emergency Contact, Family. It asked for a name. She typed Claire Ann Collins. Under Relationship, Granddaughter. Under Secondary Contact, she typed Iris Monroe. Under Notes, she wrote, No access authorized to anyone not listed. No exceptions. She saved. Then closed the portal. The cursor blinked once before fading. That afternoon, she met with Doreen Wyatt, her transition coordinator for the co-op. A warm woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense smile and an iPad always at the ready. Everything's set for post-rehab move-in, Doreen confirmed. Unit 1B will be fully prepped. If your recovery takes longer than planned, we can extend the grace period for turnover on your current property. Janet nodded. I don't expect delays. Then we'll schedule furniture transport for the second week of April, assuming your PT clears you. Perfect. Doreen tucked her stylus behind her ear. You've made this a very easy transition, Ms. Collins. Most people get tangled. Janet looked her square in the eye. I've already been tangled. Doreen offered a respectful smile. Then you're ahead of most. They shook hands. No fuss, no drama. Janet appreciated women like that, who didn't mistake silence for indecision. When she returned home, the sun had begun to sink behind the oak in her front yard. The light it cast through the window wasn't golden. It was flat, gray, winter-heavy. Not sad, just honest. Claire arrived just as Janet was taping the final moving label to the box marked Medication, Personal, Post-op. "I can handle your discharge if you want," Claire said as she stepped inside. "Stay with me the first week. I'll make soup, avoid small talk, keep the fridge stocked." Janet glanced at her. "Only if you promise not to talk about him," Claire stilled. "I wasn't planning to," Janet nodded. "Good." She walked over to the chair near the window and sat slowly. The hip had grown more demanding in the past few days, tugging, barking back when she moved too fast. But it wasn't the pain that settled in her bones tonight. It was the finality. In a few weeks, her body would be carved open. The part that had betrayed her movement would be replaced, piece by metal piece. It was brutal, yes, but honest, clear. Unlike people. Claire lowered herself into the opposite chair, pulling out her phone. "Want me to add a fraud alert to my credit profile?" "Already done," Janet said. "I called the bureau this morning. You're locked until further notice." Claire looked up, surprised. "You did that without asking." "I did that because I'm not asking anymore," Janet said. They sat in silence. The heater hummed low. A car passed on the street and was gone. After a long moment, Claire said softly, "He's going to try again." Janet didn't look at her, just kept her eyes on the folded confirmation letter beside her. "He already did," she said. "The moment he whispered something I was never meant to hear." That sentence? That was his true signature, and he never apologized for it. Claire leaned back, her hands tightening in her lap. What if he shows up at the hospital? Janet finally turned to her. Her voice was quiet, controlled. "Then I hope he enjoys the look on security's face when they escort him off the property." The sale went through without ceremony. No for sale sign, no open house, no listing photos with strategically placed fruit bowls and fake smiles. Richard handled everything through a private LLC, an anonymous transaction protected under the name Pine Hollow Property Group, the shell company he'd recommended months earlier when they'd first started building her trust. "Let the address change hands," he'd said, "not your name." So that's what she did. The papers were signed in his office on a Monday morning. No witnesses beyond his notary, no calls to Derek, no family to notify. The wire transfer hit her trust account within 24 hours. It was done. Janet had sold the home her son was still telling people he'd one day inherit, and he didn't even know it was gone. The final cleaning happened quietly that Thursday. Claire arrived early, wearing sweats and a headband, already hauling garbage bags out of the back seat of her car. Janet had taken care of most of the packing already, had gone room by room, not rushed, just resolved. But the last few corners still needed to be cleared. The forgotten ones, the ones she'd walked past for years. They started in the garage. Claire pulled an old tarp off a coffee table. Oak veneer, chipped at the legs, one side sagging. "This thing?" she asked, eyebrows raised. Janet didn't look at it right away. She kept sorting tools into the donation bin. But when she did glance up, her expression barely changed. "He said he'd fix that. 8 years ago." Claire pushed a hand against the frame. The wood bowed with a hollow creak. "Should have tossed it then." "I kept it out of guilt," Janet said. "Like maybe it meant something that he offered. Like I had to hold on to the gesture even when he never followed through." Claire didn't respond. She just lifted one end and carried it to the curb. The table hit the pavement with a satisfying crack. They worked in tandem for a while. No small talk, just quiet coordination. A bag of old batteries, outdated manuals. A stack of VHS tapes labeled Derek, age 47. Janet took a photo of the spines and slid them into a memory box. She didn't need the tapes. She just needed to prove to herself they were once real. In the laundry room, she wiped down the shelf where she used to keep extra socks and spare change in an old coffee canister. The canister was gone now. So was the habit of hoping someone else would remember what mattered. By mid-afternoon, the house was empty. They stood in the living room, echo all around them. Janet took one final walk, from the fireplace to the bay window, then down the hall that once smelled like fabric softener and lemon-scented cleaner on Saturday mornings. In the master bedroom, she paused at the open closet. Just for a second. Not because she'd left anything behind. Just to look at the empty rod, the space. The nothingness where once she'd kept too many things, waiting. Claire stood in the doorway. "You all right?" Janet nodded. "I kept too many things waiting on him." Claire didn't move. "Not anymore." Janet walked past her, slow and steady. No limp today, just quiet motion. As they pulled away from the house, now owned by someone whose name she'd never need to learn, Janet didn't look back. She didn't need to. Claire drove. Janet held the deed transfer in her lap, like a letter that never had to be sent. "I thought this would hurt more," Claire said softly. "It would've," Janet replied. "If I were still pretending I was leaving something behind." They turned onto the main road. The late afternoon light stretched across the windshield, warm and sharp, like a new edge. Janet's phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. Claire glanced at it. "You want me to—" "No," Janet said, answering it herself. She didn't say hello, just waited. A pause, then Derek's voice. "I need to talk to you about the house." Janet didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She just ended the call, blocked the number, and placed the phone face down on her lap. Her voice was low. "He noticed." Claire glanced at her. "Too late?" Janet stared straight ahead, her face unreadable. "Always was." The email from Derek came through at 8:13 a.m. sharp. Subject: urgent, regarding the house sale. "I need clarification. I was under the impression that I had some claim. I don't understand how this was done without discussion. I expect transparency. And if we need mediation, I'm willing to explore that. Please respond as soon as possible." Janet didn't. She simply forwarded it to Richard with no subject line, no note. 2 hours later, his reply arrived. It was only one sentence. "My client is not legally nor financially obligated to explain actions regarding assets she solely owns." She printed it. 3 copies. One for her binder, one for her fireproof lockbox, and one that she slipped into the back pocket of her purse. Not because she needed to use it, but because there was something quietly powerful about carrying the truth in writing. Richard called later that afternoon. "I'll draft a cease and desist. You don't have to send it yet, but it'll be ready. If he escalates, if he calls again, emails again, tries to make claims about joint interest, we'll send it certified." Janet's voice was calm. "Add it to the toolkit. I'll include language about harassment and the misuse of financial history." "Good." There was a pause. Then Richard said, in a tone as dry as winter wind, "He'll have to find a new cash cow." Janet's lips curled slightly. "He already thinks I'm broke." A longer pause. "Let's keep it that way." That night, Claire sat at Janet's kitchen table, a blank card in front of her. Thick cardstock, blue ink, nothing written yet. Janet glanced over as she folded clean dish towels into thirds. "Are you going to send it?" Claire shook her head. "No, I keep thinking about what I'd say. If I could say anything." Janet waited. Claire tapped the pen once, then finally began. "You don't get to say I'm difficult just because I saw through you. You don't get to call it a misunderstanding when you were counting on silence. I'm not mad. I'm clear. That's worse for you, I think." She stared at it, then drew a line through the words, not messily, just enough to disappear them. Janet spoke softly. "You don't need to forgive him to be done with him." Claire nodded. "I know." She folded the card in half and slipped it into her bag. It wasn't for mailing, it was for moving on. At 7:40 that evening, Iris arrived with a chilled bottle of champagne and 2 mismatched flutes. "To financial sterilization," she declared, popping the cork like it was a birthday. Janet raised her glass. "To clarity." Claire sipped and winced. "That's dry." "It's supposed to be," Iris said. "Sweets for when you're still pretending something's going to work out." Janet laughed. "Short? Real?" They toasted again, not to revenge, not to freedom, but to the fact that nothing would be reversed. Not the papers, not the firewall, not the choice to walk away. Later, when the house was quiet and the dishes had been washed and dried, Janet sat by the window and opened her leather-bound binder. She flipped through the dividers until she reached a tab labeled Defensive Legal. Behind it, the notarized letter, the trust restructure, the physician's cognitive confirmation, and now Richard's one-line reply, clipped neatly to the draft cease and desist. She didn't read them again. She just held the weight of the pages in her hand. Each one was a boundary. Each one a decision made in full light, each one a lock on a door that would never open again. Claire passed by the hallway, pausing only a moment. "Would you have ever done this?" she asked, "if he hadn't whispered it?" Janet looked up. "No," she said, "but I would have needed to." She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. At 9:16 p.m., Derek called again. Blocked. At 9:17, Melanie emailed. "We think this has gotten out of hand. No one's trying to hurt you." Janet moved the message to her archive folder. Noise. She opened a blank document, titled it, "When They Go Quiet, Don't Answer," then typed a single line beneath it. "Their version of peace comes when you give them everything and call it love." She closed the file, saved, backed it up to the vault, and poured the last inch of champagne. The invitation arrived in a navy blue envelope, gold script embossed on the front. The Collins annual legacy dinner honoring 3 generations of family and community impact. Janet opened it at the counter while her kettle boiled, flipping the thick cardstock over once, twice, as if looking for the part they'd left out. The footnote about betrayal, maybe. There wasn't one, just an RSVP card. 2 lines. "Will attend, regretfully decline." She checked the second box. No explanation, no note. She slipped the card back in the return envelope and mailed it that afternoon, not because she needed closure, but because she wanted the silence to be officially hers. Claire went without her, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. She texted Janet just before stepping inside the hotel ballroom. "If it's awful, I'll be out in 30 minutes, Janet replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. She didn't ask for photos, didn't ask what Claire was wearing, didn't even ask what the venue looked like this year. She already knew. It was always the same: borrowed elegance, catered charm, and the sound of polished people pretending. At 7:17 p.m., Claire texted again. "They didn't even ask where you were." At 7:35, Melanie's giving a toast about legacy. It's all a performance. At 7:41, "I'm leaving." Janet didn't reply. Instead, she sat alone at a quiet table in the back corner of a neighborhood bistro. A place with real wood tables and warm lighting, not curated, just lived in. No one here was performing. No one here was pretending they remembered your name because it was printed on a place card. The server, a kind-eyed man in his 30s, poured her a single glass of red. Nothing too sweet, nothing too expensive. She ordered the trout, roasted carrots, and the lemon tart she hadn't let herself enjoy in months. She didn't rush, didn't bring a book, didn't check her phone. She just sat, upright, present, whole. When the wine arrived, she raised the glass, not in triumph, not in defiance, just acknowledgement. Of the years she'd waited to be thought of the years she'd organized, showed up, made excuses, ironed tablecloths, bit her tongue, and now, she raised the glass higher, just slightly. "To the space they thought I needed to fill," she murmured. "Let them fill it." She drank. Claire showed up at her place an hour later, still wearing her heels but barefoot by the time she stepped through the door, carrying 2 slices of untouched cheesecake wrapped in hotel napkins. "You didn't miss anything," she said, dropping them in the fridge. "Wasn't planning to." They had your name on the guest list. Table 6, between Melanie and one of Derek's clients. Janet gave a small smile. Poetic. Claire plopped down on the couch. Melanie talked about shared values in her toast, and how legacy means making room for everyone, even difficult people. Janet didn't flinch. She always was brave behind a microphone. Claire laughed, then grew quiet. It was strange being in a room where no one said your name. Janet turned off the lamp beside her chair. "They haven't said my name in years. Not really." "Do you regret not going?" Janet stood and walked to the kitchen, her joints slow but steady. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. "No." Claire looked over. "Not even a little." Janet sipped the water. There was a time when being left out felt like punishment. Now it feels like protection. Later, when the house was quiet and Claire had gone home, Janet sat with her laptop and opened the folder titled Firewall File. Emotional. She added a new entry. Declined invitation, no follow-up, no mention in speeches, silence confirmed by proxy, response, none needed. She saved the file, then opened another document, still blank. She titled it piece I didn't perform, then wrote, I was never the ghost. I was the mirror they refused to look into. She closed the laptop and turned out the light. Her phone buzzed once, an email. She checked the sender. Derek Collins. Subject. You not showing up tonight said everything. She didn't open it. She moved it to the archive folder labeled Unnecessary Confirmations. The lights in the surgical prep bay were too bright to feel real, like someone had overcorrected for a darkness no one wanted to admit existed. Janet lay on the narrow gurney, already in her surgical gown, compression socks pulled tight. The nurse had just finished confirming her name, birth date, and procedure for the third time. Claire stood beside her, arms crossed, silent but steady. Iris sat in the corner, flipping through an old issue of Sunset magazine, the kind with recipes no one ever really makes and patios no one can afford. Janet turned her head toward Claire. No crying, she said. Not even after, Claire cracked a smile. Then you better not make it dramatic. I'm getting a hip replacement, not walking into the light. You'd make walking into the light look organized, Iris mumbled from behind the magazine. A nurse entered. Ms. Collins, Or 2 is ready for you. Claire squeezed her hand once, quick and firm, no sentimentality. We'll be here, Janet gave a small nod. Don't talk to anyone who calls while I'm under, she said. Not him, not her. Not anyone I wouldn't trust with the house key. Iris folded the magazine shut. The firewall lives, honey. You're safe. They wheeled her away. Surgery lasted just under 2 hours. The surgeon, a wiry man with a reputation for precision over bedside charm, appeared in the waiting area still in his scrubs. She did exceptionally well, he said. Textbook. No complications. Recovery starts today. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Iris nodded, unsurprised. She doesn't do anything halfway. By that evening, Janet was awake and sipping water from a paper cup. Her pain was sharp but controlled, her thoughts clear. A nurse wheeled in a walker, and with gritted teeth and one deep breath, Janet stood. The floor was cold, the movement foreign, but she was upright. 3 steps forward, 3 back. She made the nurse count aloud. That's 6, she said. Not 5. Put it in the chart. The nurse smiled. You're already ahead of the curve? Her attending paused at the door later that night. You've got the cleanest paperwork and pre-approval trail I've seen this quarter. Whoever organized your insurance coverage did it with military-level precision. Janet gave a half-smile. That'd be me. He tapped her chart. We'll likely discharge you early if this keeps up. Good, she said. I have a new address to get back to. She was discharged 2 days later. Claire picked her up with the passenger seat leaned back and a pillow already tucked against the door. Iris had stocked her new place ahead of time. Low-sodium soup, chamomile tea, and the brand of oatmeal she liked that never made it onto Derek's grocery list. At the co-op, Unit 1B smelled faintly of lavender and lemon balm. The thermostat had been set exactly to 72. There were flowers on the windowsill, nothing extravagant. Just daisies, honest flowers. Janet lowered herself into the recliner, exhaled, and shut her eyes. It was the first time in weeks she felt every cell in her body agree. You are not in danger. Claire brought over a tray with water, meds, and her phone. Nothing urgent, she said. Couple of spam calls, a text from Melanie. Janet opened her eyes. Delete it. Claire nodded. Done. Later that night, after Claire left and the house fell into a clean, padded silence, Janet sat up with her walker and moved slowly to the kitchen. She filled the kettle, poured tea, stood while it steeped. She didn't feel broken, or weak, or grateful. She felt rebuilt, selectively, on purpose. She carried her tea back to the recliner and sat down just as the sun dipped behind the tree line. Outside, someone walked a dog past the window. They didn't pause. They didn't know her name, and that was the piece of it. Her phone buzzed once, a voicemail from a number not in her contacts. She let it play, Derek's voice. They said you got through surgery fine. That's good. I was just wondering if maybe there's still a window for us to talk. I've said dumb things. I know that. But people change, right? There was a pause. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Janet deleted it and sipped her tea. Janet labeled the last folder complete and snapped the binder shut with a sound that felt like punctuation. The living trust, the medical directives, the notarized property transfers, all filed, all sealed. There was no next step, no open loop, no signature left hanging in a limbo of hope. She slid the binder back into the fireproof drawer under the desk and locked it. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like order. 2 days later, Claire found an envelope on her kitchen counter, tucked beneath the kettle she'd borrowed from Janet's place after the surgery. Her name was written across the front in clean, steady handwriting. No flourish, just fact. Inside, a check for $1,000 and a note clipped to it, for doing what he didn't. No strings, no lessons, just thanks. Claire stared at the check for a long moment before folding it in half, tucking it into her drawer with her favorite pens, the kind Janet used to keep in her desk at the house. Claire now barely thought about. She never asked why it wasn't more. She knew. That check wasn't about the money. It was a ledger entry in a life that finally made sense. Janet joined a writing group at the community library. Wednesday mornings, 10 a.m. to noon. Mostly women in their 60s and 70s. Some retired, some reinvented. They wrote on legal pads, in spiral notebooks, on cracked iPads with outdated software. No one knew her story, not really. They just knew she was precise with language and never late. Her first piece was titled, Misheard, Misused, Moved On. She didn't write Derek's name once, didn't need to. Anyone who needed to know already would. When she read the first paragraph aloud to the group, a woman named Georgia placed her pen down and whispered, "That's exactly what silence sounds like." Janet smiled. "It's not silence," she said. "It's editing." Spring came early that year. Janet started walking further. No cane, no pause. Just that deliberate grace she'd spent a lifetime learning and a single whisper unlearning. Claire called often, but not out of worry. Iris stopped by once a week with paperbacks and gossip that didn't include the name Collins anymore. The co-op bloomed with low-maintenance tulips and the smell of someone's banana bread always drifting from Unit 1D. And Derek? He never called again. Not a voicemail. Not a postcard. Not an apology. It didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like release. Janet never looked for his name in the news, never asked Claire if he was still in town. She had long since stopped archiving the messages. Now she archived the peace. One afternoon, she sat at her desk with a stack of receipts. Legal fees, notary payments, long-forgotten filing costs, and one line item for a document scanner she didn't really need but had enjoyed using. She kept them all. Not because she needed the deductions, because they were evidence, not of loss, of investment, of priority, of choosing herself in writing. Her tea kettle whistled softly in the kitchen. She stood slower than she used to, but firmer than they expected, and poured a mug. She drank it standing up, watching the steam curl, letting the moment settle without naming it. No bitterness, no longing, no grief, just receipts, just peace, and a door they would never open again. She walked back to her desk and opened a new document. The screen blinked. Ready. She typed the first line without hesitation. At my surgery consultation, my son whispered, "Not worth the expense." So I spent everything on a lawyer instead. Best health decision I ever made. She hit save, and finally, she rested.